Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, May 26th, 2025, and our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Thanks for having me. Look, it's a holiday here in the United States, and you've already made me take my blood pressure medicine.
Larry, after the phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, the tone somehow was positive on the part of the Trump administration, on the part of Russians. Until yesterday, here is what Donald Trump tweeted or posted on his social truth. Said it's always I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia, but has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy. He's needlessly killing a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. He talks about the downfall of Russia. The tone is so much aggressive. What's going on in the mind of Donald Trump right now?
Are you claiming that he has a mind, that he's thoughtful? I mean, this is. I mean, it's posts like that that makes you really question his sanity and his mental state. So let's look at what happened since Friday and through Sunday morning. Um, Russia launched something like 543 drone attacks, over 83 missile attacks. You know how many civilians were killed according to Ukrainian press? 15. Now, I'm not laughing at the deaths of 15 people, but that means that the Russians are really bad shots, or they were taking extra care in the launching of these weapons to destroy military facilities. Now, I think what's got Trump so angry is that Russia probably killed some American soldiers who were on the ground there fighting with the Ukrainians. That's why he's upset. You know, Putin, crazy. Look in the mirror, Donald. Crazy is what's on your face, not what's on Putin's face. Putin has made it very clear that he's going to protect and defend Russia. If I guarantee you that if the United States suffered just a tenth of what Russia has suffered as a result of attacks on Russian soil by U.S. supplied, funded, and assisted guerrillas, insurgents, or military personnel from, say, Mexico or Canada, the United States would be trying to obliterate them without regard for killing civilians. You know, we'd be going full Bibi Netanyahu on them. So this is, yeah, like you, when I read that and then heard his comments on, on the tarmac, what an embarrassment. He's a disgrace.
Larry, it's not just about that. It's about the restrictions that Europeans together with the United States were somehow talking about. They're not going to send a lot of weapons, all of the intelligence. They're going to just diminish the level. Even I can argue on the part of the United States was the case that they somehow declared that they're going to reduce the aid to Ukraine, but it doesn't seem that would be the case. The German chancellor said that they're going to remove the restrictions. Britain, France, Germany, together with the United States, are going to lift restrictions on the range of military supplies to Ukraine. What does that mean?
Well, my understanding, he didn't say that they are going to. He said that they have.
Yeah, they have. Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
so it's not something in the future, something that
No,
they've already
in the
done.
past. No, no.
Okay, so they're going to expand the war, and Germany may get bombed, France may get bombed, UK may get bombed, and the United States may get bombed. It's going to be that simple. Russia's not going to stand back and be a punching bag any longer. They said this is enough is enough. Now, Russia is not, they are not reacting too strongly to Trump's comments. They're staying relatively calm on that front. But Putin did come out today and said very clearly, if that is true, and if this happens, that will be considered that then you are directly involved. And if you're directly involved, then you're a target. And Russia's got this thing called the Orushnik, an intermediate range ballistic missile that they can fire off into Germany, France, or the UK, and they can't do a damn thing to stop it. So, yeah, there's always the potential for this war to escalate. The Europeans have lost their collective minds, and it is, they're going on, they're on the road to destroying themselves, and it's all predicated on the notion that Russia, the fact that Russia is defending itself after 30 plus years of Western efforts to subvert and destroy Russia. Russia was biding its time, waiting till it was strong enough to, fight off the Vandals from the West.
What does Germany, what can they do? German government and German army, are they going to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine?
Well, they might send the Taurus. If they provide the Taurus, then I think that you've guaranteed that there's going to be military strikes by Russia inside Germany. And, the Germans are not in a position to fight anybody. Their industrial base even is weakening, which was once, it was the pride of Europe. But here's they keep said, oh, we don't want inexpensive oil and gas. Well, we want the most expensive stuff, so we'll have to close down factories. I noticed just 2 days ago, this one factory that produced high quality paper that was used in magazines. Now, admittedly, magazines are becoming sort of a thing of the past as people move increasingly to the digital side, but they couldn't stay in business to serve even a niche market because of the cost of energy. And so when they close, people lose jobs. And as they lose those jobs, then the shopping in the cities where the city where that factory is based goes down. The economy starts to deteriorate.
What is the main objectives that Donald Trump is pursuing in the aftermath of the phone call between the two presidents that are somehow, in his mind, they're not going to be achievable? That's why he's changing, if that's the case, that he's changing his rhetoric toward Russia. We know that Europeans are, I if I consider Europe as the most radical part of the conflict, they're just going to be more than happy with the new position of Donald Trump.
Well, I'm not sure. Cynically, I'd say Trump's interest is to do something that would secure him a Nobel Peace Prize and burnish his reputation as the 21st century Jesus, as far as being a peacemaker. As far as any actual strategy or goal to bring about genuine peace and to stop, to ease the conflicts. Look, this is very, very simple to fix. All he has to do is say the United States is no longer going to supply any weapons, any financial assistance, no intelligence assistance to Ukraine until Ukraine withdraws from Russian territory. That's number one. Well, that war would come to a screeching halt. But he's not doing that. He's playing a double game. He's this ain't my war. This is Biden's war. This is Obama's war. This ain't Trump's war. No, it is your war. He's enabling it as much as Obama and Biden did. And he should stop. I really get tired of hearing that refrain come out of his mouth. He is as culpable as anybody, and in some respects more so, because he says one thing and does another. So the hypocrisy of it. Putin has made it clear they're willing to talk. They'll sit down and talk to the Ukrainians to see if they can negotiate an end to the war. But the war is going to continue. And as Medvedev said the other day, and it's been echoed in part by Putin. If they don't take the Ukrainians don't take this deal, the next time they're going to be talking about disposing of 8 oblasts of Ukraine that will now be under Russian control, and Russia will continue to push the buffer zone to the west. Militarily, they can do it. But you know, we're seeing. I don't know if you intended to go down this path, but there was this article in the Washington Post on the 24th, so that was Saturday, saying that basically Russia's losing the war. And the entire purpose of that article was to put pressure on Donald Trump to provide more military aid and assistance, not to back away, because the message is, well, Russia's losing, man. All we got to do is push a little harder. I wrote an article about it at sonar21.com. In my opening sentence, I just note that if that article, if those ladies, the 3 ladies that wrote it, if they got paid $1 million per lie, they will have collected enough money to pay down at least 10% of the $35 trillion U.S. debt. I mean, it's packed full of lies and misrepresentations. But you know, that's what's going on in the West. People deluding, deceiving the American public is a critical element in this ability to continue to support the war.
Right after the phone call, when Donald Trump said that 2 parties should talk to each other, I said that this is not a good sign. This is not Zelensky is not interested in getting anything with Russians.
Right.
The Zelensky administration, whoever represents Ukraine in these sort of talks, they're not interested. They're interested in the continuation, maybe, of the talks of the war. Here is what the Ukrainian are talking about, member of parliament in Ukraine.
That the promise of President Trump to achieve peace through strength, that we were very hopeful with, that finally he will stop trying to appease Putin, negotiate with Putin, talk about Putin's respect, etc., 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 and move to really 2 things that actually worked: putting economic pressure on Russia so they would not be able to manufacture drones and missiles, and arming Ukraine the way that we can defend ourselves and push Russia back. This is a reality that needs to happen, and we just hope that there has been enough time, enough proofs, enough deaths for President Trump to finally realize what needs to happen next.
Yeah. How can you expect these people negotiating, talking with Russians?
Well, the entire premise of this is false, that this is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. That, you know, Trump and others in the West are pretending that, you know, Russia just woke up on February 2022 and said, by God, we've got these imperial ambitions. We want to conquer the world. We're going to start with Ukraine. Without any appreciation for the Western interference, and even prior to the Maidan, the Western-backed coup, is the building up of NATO and using NATO explicitly as a way to try to equip Ukraine with the capabilities so that they would be able to take on and defeat Russia. You know, I hear a lot of people, you know, I've heard some people that are the big Kool-Aid drinkers when it comes to the war and insist that the United States had nothing to do with the Maidan. I would simply point out that anyone who doubts about the influence of Western intelligence agencies in manipulating the situation in Ukraine need only look at Russiagate here in the United States, where we now have irrefutable evidence that the CIA and the FBI in league with people in the media, concocted an entire fabricated story of Donald Trump being a tool and a puppet of the Russians, and that the Russians were interfering, meddling in our election, for God's sake. It was all a lie. It was all of this was designed to, if you will, make it impossible for Donald Trump to deal with Russia in a normal way. So, we've seen the extension of it. We now know that goes on overseas. So it is just, the ball's in Donald Trump's court. Is he going to continue to, withdraw U.S. assistance and get the United States out of that war, or is he going to up the ante? I mean, candidly, the guy is delusional. West Point the other day, he was commenting on hypersonic missiles, that Russia stole that technology from us. Well, if they stole it from us, why the hell haven't we been able to deploy even one single effective combat operational hypersonic missile? It's because he's lying. We didn't do that. And, he can persist in this fantasy of, oh, we got the best military in the world. We're so good. Yeah. We couldn't defeat the Mujahideen and the Taliban in Afghanistan, and we've failed in Vietnam and Iraq and Syria. And, come on. At some point, we got to get off of our military. I call it a psychedelic road trip. Boy, we convince ourselves that we're the best and the greatest, and we're anything but. The only thing we are is facilitators of murder and mayhem.
Larry, if you look at the war in Ukraine and the way that the West has provided everything to Ukraine, you name it, from Donald Trump first term, and he's talking about javelins and all the weapons, Patriot systems. I don't know, even cluster bombs, if you remember, and all of these weapons, they didn't work. They didn't. The sanctions. This member of parliament in Ukraine, she's asking for the same sort of strategy that has been the case before Donald Trump coming to power.
Right.
And what else can West provide to Ukraine in order to help them militarily?
Nothing. I mean, look, the key issue is manpower. So even if Ukraine now lowers the age of recruitment to 18, or they've lowered it and they start bringing in 100,000, 200,000 Ukrainian 18-year-olds, they're not trained. So where are they going to get trained? Russia right now can hit every single military training facility in Ukraine if it wants to. So if you're going to bring together those numbers and start training them, they're going to start getting killed immediately. And any training program to have somebody ready where they could be going on into a battlefield situation and function with some degree of competence, you're talking 6 to 8 months. Ukraine doesn't have 6 to 8 months. So it doesn't matter what, brand new toys we provide them, short of providing them with intercontinental ballistic missiles, that there's no game changer. In the summer of 2022, Scott Ritter and I had a debate where when they announced that they were going to send HIMARS, that the West was sending HIMARS to the Ukrainians, and Scott was, oh, this is a game changer. And I said, no, it's not. Yeah, it's a new weapon, but it's not going to change the game. It's just going to give Russia one more thing to blow up, which is, it took them initially a little bit to figure out how to defeat it and how to go after it. But, now it's ineffective. Again, Ukraine is Ukraine is now relegated to the position that all they can do is attack civilians. They're not effective at going after hard military targets, and they're certainly not taking back any territory. The argument, like in this Washington Post article I referenced earlier, is, oh, Russia's just making incremental, slow gains. And it's like, really? When you look at the amount of territory that they've actually been capturing, but this is not about a war to capture the flag, figure out how much territory you can take. It's first and foremost about bleeding out the Ukrainian military and NATO supplies, and NATO indirectly, which is exactly what Russia's doing. They may reach a point where they're going to launch the kinds of attacks that are going to envelop large portions of territory east of the Dnieper River. I do anticipate that's going to happen, but it just shows a fundamental lack of understanding about what's going on.
What's the evidence on the part of Donald Trump? Here is in his post, Larry. He's talking about, it seems that he feels somehow Russia wants to capture all of Ukraine. Who's providing this information to Donald Trump? And I don't know, after more than 2 hours of direct talk with Vladimir Putin on a phone call, why is he talking this way? It's just beyond me. I cannot understand what's going on in his mind.
Like I said, you're making the assumption that he has a fully functioning mind. I'm questioning his mental competence. The way he keeps he starts speaking like he's talking to sixth graders. Repeats stuff over and over, and a lot of what he says is just that absolutely wrong. As I referenced the claim about the hypersonic missiles as an example. But again, even in that tweet to refer to Putin as crazy, when Donald Trump in the same breath will threaten to I'm going to blow the hell out of people. He's talking about how all these nations are coming to kiss his ass. His words, not mine. And look how many countries have lined up to negotiate trade deals with the United States because of Donald Trump's pressure. One, the UK. I said he's living in an alternate universe with this stuff. While Trump represents a needed change in the American policy, his execution of it is turning out to be pretty chaotic, and he's creating some real problems on the economic front that I think largely will end up potentially destroying his presidency. It's either that or he's going to, get himself into a war with Iran. So I mean, and while he's at it, let's toss in deepening U.S. role in the war in Ukraine.
If he finally get in line with what Europeans want to do in Ukraine, do you think that in the Trump circle, in these people who are surrounding him, who are talking to him, do they really understand what has happened to Russia during the last 3 years of the conflict, more than 3 years of the approaching 4 years? And look at Russia economically, militarily. Do they have a realistic picture of Russia?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I'm part of a group of individuals. A lot of them are prominent Wall Street people, investors. You think they have a lot of savvy, and there's a group of them that, if I gave you their names, you'd know them, that are insisting that Russia's economy is collapsing. It's on the verge of collapse just any minute now. But I try to point out, I say, well, that's actually not what I've seen. And people who live there, that I've got, I've made friends as a result of my travels there with several people. And if the economic conditions really were turning sour, you'd know about it. There's also on the YouTube channel, there's a great story. This one family from Canada that's moved to Russia to start farming. They got like 8 kids. It's called Countryside Acres. Again, they're not complaining about, oh, the inflation's terrible. Oh, we can't get this product. We got, it's normal. And yet, when you try to explain that to them, all they come back, oh, no, you're just a puppet of Putin. And they insist that the West is, these Western experts are declaring that Russia's going to collapse. And that they're trying to manage the information flow and to deny the reality of what's taking place. So, but, that's not going to affect. Russia's not worried about what's being said on social media. They're taking care of business on the battlefield. That's where this entire matter is going to be decided. It's not going to be through negotiations that, the European desire to get a ceasefire in place so Russia will stop killing and bleeding out the Ukrainians isn't going to happen, in my view.
And in terms of their military, Larry, in your opinion, Russia, the way that their military is growing technically, and their economy, their budget is growing, and they're improving a lot of weapons, making a lot of weapons. The new forces are coming to the army. How the war in Ukraine has transformed the Russian army, and how is it going to be perceived by the West if we assume that they somehow understand what's going on in Russia?
Well, this is actually the process that the Russians have undergone to rebuild their military started in 2008 after the attack on Russian peacekeepers in Georgia and then Russia's military response to that. Putin realized early on that they had to do some intense reforms and to rebuild military capabilities. When you go back and look at the dismal state of the Russian economy in 1999, when Vladimir Putin took it over and was faced with an aggressive Western-backed war by the Chechens, by these Islamic extremists, which continued for 10 years until Russia finally beat them. It really is sort of a miracle what he has accomplished. Was accomplished under his leadership, and then followed in office by Dmitry Medvedev, I think in 2008. That Russia's been preparing this all along. So now, I guess last year they were recruiting at an average of 30,000 soldiers a month, signing up. They're getting signing bonuses. And the West says, oh, that's not real. They're just getting signing bonuses. And meanwhile, you got the Trump's Department of Defense celebrating, oh, man, we met all of our recruiting goals last year. Yeah, that you met your recruiting goals because instead of recruiting 70,000 for the year, we're not talking by month, for the year, they lowered the goal to 50,000. Hey, we made our goal. Hey, you get we'll let you earn your PhD, Nima, if instead of answering 100% of the questions, you only have to answer 60%. And then, but you get to say, oh, I got my PhD. That's what they're doing. So, but this year, Russia's signing people up at the rate of 50,000 a month. So the Russian army has grown to be about 1.5 million. And Russia's got the luxury of rotating people in and out. Danny Davis had an American drone operator who's actually fighting on the Russian side on his show the other day. And the guy was talking about how what life was like, and they weren't really stressed out that they're getting rotations, appropriate rotations. They're not being stuck on the line for 2-3 years at a time, like has happened to many in Ukraine. So this failure to understand what the Russian military is capable of, and then on the production front, again, this article in the Washington Post was saying, "Oh, they're falling behind. They're not going to be able to keep producing tanks." Well, right now, Russia's producing 250 tanks a year, plus they're refurbishing some of the, let's call it Soviet era tanks, updating them, modernizing them. So, probably another 500, 600 of those per year. How many tanks is the United States building? Less than 70. So here's a country, Russia, with 1/3 the population of the United States, producing 3 times as many tanks. Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, said the other day that Russia is producing in 3 months the amount of artillery shells that NATO combined cannot produce in a year. But Russia's in trouble, you see. That's the narrative they're trying to sell now in the West. It's just crazy.
I remember you mentioned that the United States, in order to produce some sort of arms, they needed to bring Turkish experts to the United States to help them. When it comes to the war of attrition, how the way that is happening right now between Russia and Ukraine, by the way, how do you see the capabilities on the part of the United States? Are they we talking about artillery shells? We're talking about the weapons that can be used in a war of attrition. Is the military-industrial complex still interested in producing those sort of arms?
Well, it's not a matter of being interested. It's a matter of what money has been appropriated by Congress and what priorities have been established by the Secretary of Defense. And so you got an interesting situation underway. They're no longer producing Patriot missiles, or the Lockheed Martin's putting out the missiles that you fire, but as far as the actual batteries, those launch, let's call them the launch systems, my understanding is they're no longer producing that. Same for HIMARS. So they're running out. What as they use it, they don't have replacements to file in. Now they put other new weapon systems on the board that are supposed to be produced, but a lot of those haven't actually gone into production, or they haven't actually been field tested yet and proven to be effective. So the problem for the United States, and our friend Andrei Martyanov has written about this extensively, is Russia is guided by a national security strategy. In other words, they're not, it's like building a house. You lay out you got the blueprint, and then you figure out you got to pour the foundations, and then you've got to raise the infrastructure, the walls, and there's a whole process and sequence that you go through to build the structure. So at the end, you wind up with a home that is beautiful, something you want to live in. The same applies to defense policy. So from the Russian standpoint, they're saying, okay, look, we've got to have an army of large enough size that we can fight off an invader. They're not saying we've got to have an army that can go to sail around the world and invade China, or invade Saudi Arabia, or invade Brazil. Their entire focus is on our military is here for stay at home and protect us. The same with the air defense, the same with combat air, the same with naval operations. So it's all integrated into a plan. Not in the United States. It is there's no plan about what is it that we're trying to do. We've basically set up an international lethal police force, where we get to go around and tell other countries what to do, and we're going to try to impose our will. Except modern technology now is brought a fundamental change to that. And we just saw it with the Houthis. Again, Trump's tough talk about, oh, we're going to show them, by God, we're going to, they're going to learn what hell really is. And who got forced to retreat from the Red Sea? Donald Trump. But he called all the Houthis, they capitulated. So we'll let you off this time. But we ran away. So this is the United States, the complete absence of a strategy is what renders, U.S. military assistance. We got some bells and whistles, but just having noisemakers doesn't constitute a party.
I was wondering if Donald Trump would be bought into this policy of putting more sanctions on Russia. Do you think he's going to go down that path?
Yeah, I do. It's going to be, if he doesn't choose to do it, his hand's going to be forced by the Senate. Lindsey Graham claims he's now got 81 sponsors, so himself plus 80 others, for this bill to impose bone-crushing sanctions on Russia. It's not really on Russia. These sanctions are going to be imposed upon China and India at 500%. This, the United States is acting like it's the only girl on a desert island with a bunch of guys. Okay? Everybody wants to date us. Everybody wants to make love to me. And so I can be as abusive to them as I want. I will pick and choose. Sorry. Not only are we not the only girl on the island, we're the fat, ugly girl. And there are other options. And that's quickly, that's becoming, a number of countries, some openly, many privately, are beginning to express that the United States is not a reliable partner. And that if anything, it's a toxic relationship. Maybe the United States is like Macron's wife, Brigitte. Did you see that? She took a punch at him. Whack! Oh, sorry.
But they're talking about it. That wasn't, they were just kidding.
Yeah, just kidding. Yeah, right.
Larry, you've raised a very important point about China and India. We know that China would not be part of the game in favor of the United States. But how about India? How they have resisted a lot the policy of the Biden administration. But right now, do you see the same sort of attitude on their part, or they're going to just bend under the Trump administration?
No, they're not going to bend to Trump. I don't think. I think there may have been, let's go back 3 months ago, there may have been a willingness to bend, but then in light of this terror attack that took place up in the Kashmir area, and then U.S. subsequent actions, along with threats from the United States to impose tariffs and other things, I think the Indians are going, again, it's like being in a toxic relationship with an abusive partner. United States, we're not the kind of, think of it as a friendship. If every time, you and I got together, I was requiring you to buy me stuff or to give me stuff, and I was requiring you got to do it my schedule. We're going to do it my time. We're going to eat what I want. We're going to do what I want. I've been through a couple of points where you said, oh, Larry, man, I'd love to see you, but boy, I'm busy. I got other things to do. You'd be looking for ways to get out. Well, that's really what's going on with the United States. The United States is, the essence of its policy is predicated upon a bullying and abuse, not upon generosity, not upon friendship. Even our so-called aid comes with strings attached. and usually the CIA is connected to it in a way that we can meddle in your country, so we can control events to suit our purposes, not yours. Look at Africa. What is after 200 years of colonial exploitation in particular, that and they're still living with the aftermath of that, like we see in South Africa, where I understand the hatred of the blacks, some of the blacks there against the white community, because that white community was not exactly Mother Teresa passing out mercy to people, and so you don't solve those problems overnight. But look at the Sahel and the poverty there. It's like in Burkina Faso right now, they're still battling an Islamic insurgency. I guarantee you that's getting aid from Western intelligence agencies. For what? Because we want to control the resources. We want to control those people, make them do what we want, not what they want. And it's certainly not about empowering them to actually become, educated and accomplished. So it's all about fostering dependency.
Larry, in the meeting between the South African president, he's president or prime minister? He's
President Ramaphosa.
Yeah, he said, "I don't have the money to buy an airplane for you."
Yeah. So I should have. What flowers and candy do,
And he's getting to that. The reason that I'm mentioning this, that was the case for Donald Trump in the Middle East. He received a lot of somehow generous welcoming to the Middle East. And right now, Donald Trump, yesterday, he said that he's so optimistic about after the 5th round of negotiations, talks between the United States and Iran. He's optimistic about that they may get something big in that front.
Mm-hmm.
And what's your evaluation? What's your understanding on what's going on? Because right before the talks happening, both sides were somehow pessimist about what would happen. And right now, it seems that the tone is changing. Your take on that?
Well, the Zionist crowd is doing everything in its power to try to derail those talks. And I know that I'll call it the Zionist interpretation, and I've seen direct messages from this crowd. They were claiming that Witkoff just walked out, and so that these talks are all Iran's going to. It's a matter of days, not weeks, before Israel starts attacking. Okay, now you contrast that with the Iranian foreign minister came out and said, "Well, okay, yeah, actually, I'm a little more hopeful now. There are a lot of tough technical issues to be resolved, but we're talking about it." Now, my understanding is this was still indirect talks. So the Iranians to tell the Omanis what they want, then the Omanis walk across the hallway and tell the Americans what the Iranians said. Then the Americans tell the Omanis what to tell the Iranians, and back and forth. They ought to be sitting in the same room talking face to face. But if Trump's serious about this, and I hope he is, the deal can be had. It'll be a very simple deal that Iran will be allowed to continue to enrich uranium at a 3.6% level. There will be an inspection regimen, maybe with the IAEA, maybe with a combination of IAEA and then U.S. and Russian or Chinese, so that they can verify that, in fact, Iran's not building a nuclear device, and the nature of the deal would encompass that on demand, the Western agencies can go and inspect facilities that they think are being hidden. But I think Iran is willing to make that kind of deal in exchange for lifting the sanctions. It makes entirely a whole lot of sense. But the hardliners, not just in Israel, here in the United States, insisting no enrichment. Not only no enrichment, but they also come back and insist that Iran's also going to eliminate its missile force, cut off all contact with Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. And Iran's not going to. They're not going to do that. So the fact that Trump in his latest remarks is positive is I take as a sign of good news.
Yeah, I think that we can be somehow optimistic because if you look at the tariffs and the war, some sort of aggressive attack, it was an attack on other countries. The tariff, specifically on China,
Yeah.
and he decided to withdraw. He's decided to back down. And if we assume that the war with Yemen was the attack on the part of Donald Trump and the way and his strategy in Yemen, because he wanted, if you remember, the officials in the Trump administration were talking about, we're gonna let Iran know how devastating, how the fight would be devastating to Yemen. They're gonna learn a lesson from Yemen. That wasn't the case. Is that contributing to what's going on right now between Iran and the United States?
Maybe. You're assuming a level of thoughtfulness with the Trump side that I've seen no evidence, for that kind of thinking.
But he knows the money. He knows the economy of what's going on.
Yeah, you'd think so. But the problem is you're getting lots of I'll call it analysis or push from these pro-Zionist groups that they insist that Iran has no air defense and that it's completely open and it's just a matter of going in and bombing and blowing up their facilities to prove that they don't have a nuke. I mean, it's childish, really. These people haven't learned a thing from prior U.S. misadventures in Iraq and both 1991 and then 2003, as well as our failure with the Houthis most recently, and just what I call the limitations of U.S. military power. So, this. The deal is there to be had. That's the thing. It's so obvious. It's so clear, and yet all these the political confusion generated from the Zionists who want to destroy Iran at any cost, and putting enormous pressure on Trump. And that's what I say. You see Trump going back and forth, flipping and flopping.
Larry, as you mentioned, Israel is talking about if the talks didn't get, if they stop talking to each other, Iranians and the United States, they don't reach an agreement in a near future, they're going to attack Iran. If, on the other hand, they're talking about if the talks progress and make some sort of, they're getting something from these talks, they're going to be concerned about what's going on between the United States and Iran. They're going to attack Iran. Do you understand what is the mindset? What would be the outcome that would satisfy the government in Israel?
Well, Israel does not on its own have the capability to attack Iran, short of launching a intermediate range ballistic missile with a nuke on it. Okay. Any other attacks that Israel would try to carry out ultimately are dependent upon U.S. assistance. Israel would need the intelligence data for locating targets as well as navigating to the target, air refueling, maybe some electronic warfare or countermeasures. a whole variety of things. So while Israel talks a good game, just doing it on their own is limited. Now, um, that they're not going to be happy if the United States and Iran sign an agreement. But there's not a lot that they can do militarily, unilaterally, to disrupt that.
What else can they bring to the conflict, to a direct war with Iran, that they couldn't bring it to the war against Yemen? Because it's so much important to know what is the upper hand for them
You
if they
mean
decide to
United
fight
States?
Iran.
United
No, I'm
States?
talking about Israelis, not talking about the United
Nothing.
States.
Well, a nuke. If they decide to use a nuclear weapon, that's it. They have even less leverage and capability when it comes to Iran, simply by the distance. At least with the Houthis in Yemen, it's a shorter time distance problem for Israel. But moving forces that far to the east for Israel be very, very difficult. That's why I said they can't do it without U.S. assistance.
Do, Larry, if you look at Israel today and what's going on in Israel in terms of the position of Netanyahu and the way that his government is trying to somehow manage the situation in Israel, we know there is a lot of criticism coming from the society to the government, and they're not happy with the situation. But it seems that they're totally agreeing with the policy in Gaza. When it comes to Iran, is that the case? The public opinion in Israel, do they want a war, a direct war with Iran?
Oh yeah.
And do they really understand the outcome of what that sort of war?
Well, yes and no. Yes, they want the war. Yes, they think they can defeat Iran, and no, they don't understand what they're getting themselves into. But look, they didn't understand what they were getting themselves into when they decided to respond to October 7th with this, military onslaught against all the Palestinians in Gaza, not just Hamas. They did have other options, and if nothing else, with the attack on October 7th, they could have rallied international support and pursued a diplomatic, if you will, isolation and punishment of Hamas. There were actually, countries in the world that would have backed them up on that at the time. Not now. So the Israel's got some significant problems. We've been hearing that they were going to launch this operation, what's it called, Gideon's Shield, to destroy and depopulate Gaza. They've been threatening to do that now for at least 2 weeks. They still haven't carried it out. Yeah, they're killing 100, 200 Palestinians every day, but they haven't launched that whole operation. You got to step back and say, why? What's going on? And part of the problem is that the reservists that constitute the majority of Israel's army, they're not responding to the call-ups. They're protesting. So even they got a majority of people that want to get rid of the Palestinians and want to get rid of Iran, when push comes to shove, they're not actually lining up and getting in uniform and say, "Okay, charge, let's go to the front." So they've got deep divisions, and those divisions are growing, more profound with each passing day.
I don't know if you saw the clip that Piers Morgan is talking with Israeli official or the representative of Israeli army or Israeli government. He mentioned that more than 20,000 Hamas fighters were killed so far. Do we have any sort of evidence for that they're making something up, or How did you find that?
I don't find it credible. Um, if it actually decimated Hamas in that fashion, then Israel would be able to just freely roam all over Gaza right now, and they're not able to. They keep getting ambushed and attacked as they come in. So, the word is the other reports suggest that its recruitment has increased, not diminished, which I find that credible.
And the train is not on their side right now.
The what is?
The train, the situation in Gaza, the way that they have
Yeah.
bombed everything and they just destroyed and make it rubble. So
Yeah, the terrain has become like Stalingrad. And the lesson that the Germans learned, much to their chagrin, was that when they bombed that city and turned it into rubble, that rubble became a source of cover and concealment, and it made it also difficult for tanks to traverse these areas. And it gives the defenders an advantage. Not necessarily a decisive win, but certainly an advantage. So, Israel's. Some of us predicted this at the outset that would be a problem for Israel. This proven to be true.
the other day we've learned that United Kingdom together with France and I don't know the third country, but they were putting some sort of,
Spain.
and Spain, they were putting pressure on Netanyahu and saying that this sort of war has to stop. But here is what Larry, the conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, said on Sky News in terms of the fight in both in Gaza and in Ukraine, but she was focused on Gaza.
And that actually you think that Mr. Netanyahu's language on this is justified?
I'm not here to police the language of the Prime Minister of Israel.
I'm not asking you to police it. I'm asking
what he has said. He sees
people need to know where you stand.
Yeah, but I've been very clear where I stand. Hamas is a terrorist group. They are not our friends.
I'm talking about what
Trevor,
you think about the Israelis'
Yes, but it's all related. Who funds Hamas? Iran, an enemy of this country. An enemy of this country. Israel is fighting a proxy war on behalf of the UK, just like Ukraine is on behalf of the Western Europe against Russia. We have to get serious. We have to get serious. There was a terrorist plot in London against the Israeli embassy. We saw 2 Jewish members of the Israeli embassy in DC killed. Whose side are we on? We need to make sure that the hostages are returned. No one wants to see a war in Gaza. Palestinians are suffering. Netanyahu is complaining that he thinks our leaders are carrying out the wrong action. He has every right to say that. What I want to see is Keir Starmer making sure that he is on the right side of British national interest. That cannot be on the side of Hamas.
What is the right side of the British national interest, and how is that a proxy war? Who's fighting with their proxy in that region? These are civilians.
Yeah. Well, look, you can go back and if you look at history, Britain is probably the most responsible for the chaos that dominates West Asia. It was their moves into Iran, where we're talking more than 100 years ago, to try to get control of the oil, and they manipulated the process, the political process in Iran, and they were a big player with the CIA in 1953 in ousting Mossadegh. Similarly, they controlled, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where they sort of divided up the Middle East after carving it out from the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, Britain's part of the problem. If that island sunk into the ocean, the world might be better off, at least as far as its foreign policy is concerned. They've been detrimental and malicious in so many ways. And again, the colonial legacy of their exploitation of people around the world, where we're talking India, South Africa, Palestine, Iran. It's gone on and on. So, what's sort of embarrassing is, this woman's was not a native British citizen. She's a black woman. She comes out of the colonial heritage,
which makes it even worse.
Yeah, it's just, we got an expression for that in the United States. It's called Uncle Tom. The house servant that's suddenly, taken up for the master. It's embarrassing.
Larry, after all, is the case of Gaza, in your opinion, is the case of Gaza, we know, we've learned that Hamas is right now they're trying to negotiate with the other part, Israel, the United States, whatever that would be. Do you have any sort of hope in any sort of ceasefire in the near future?
No, I don't.
Because the starvation is so bad right now.
Yeah. The world doesn't care. If, like you saw with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Arabs, they're in a position. Yeah, Trump wants to have a good relationship with them. They're in a position where they can say, hey, look, we're willing to have that relationship, but you got to stop Israel right now. This genocide has got to be put to a halt. And the rights of the Palestinian people need to be respected. Instead, what we're getting in the United States is this Red Scare. It's like the Red Scare of the 40s and 50s. But instead of communists, we're now using anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism gets defined as anybody that opposes Israel's murder of Palestinians. By that definition, yes, I'm an anti-Semite. Now, they want to say that means you hate Jews. It's not about this. Is about hating Jews. This is about hating the Zionists who believe that they're more special than anybody else because God likes them. It doesn't really. Everybody else are scum that God wants to wipe. Like dog manure on their shoes. Just wipe it off, scrape it away. What sort of God is that? That's really the God of Israel. This, guy, this deity that plays favorites. It's appalling. It really is appalling. And the arrogance of it is just sickening.
And the Zionist is not just about Jews. We have a lot of Christians.
Oh yeah, no. The problem is, and I know I offend a lot of Christians with this, but the Old Testament, by and large, it's a fraudulent book. The deity that's presented in the Old Testament is demonic because it's a God that doesn't, on the one hand, claims to have created everything, but out of that creation, only this one group of people get the special attention. They get the right to kill other people. This God that they worship wants blood sacrifice, wants children sacrificed. Killed the children of Egypt. It's sick, and yet, but people in their religious belief get into it, and then it becomes, if you speak out against it, oh my God, you're a heretic. That's why I'm much more comfortable with the teachings of Jesus. There's none of this special, only you, because of who you are, who you were born to, your lineage, your biological lineage determines whether or not you are part of the special people. Sorry. I go from if we're going to operate on the concept of deity, and that, as we say in our Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and that refers to man and woman, male and female, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. I believe that. And so once you come with that belief, you have to say, hey, everyone is a creation of God. We don't get to say this person's not worthy of that. Now, unfortunately, some of God's creation take great delight in killing and maiming others. And, that's what we need to put a stop to.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
My pleasure, man. Well, I guess we'll talk to you at the end of the week.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.